My point has simply been, if there is no God, life is ultimately meaningless. Friedrich Nietzsche, Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, all the great French atheistic existentialists and German nihilists point that out. It's logical. If your birth is an accident, if your death is an accident, the only thing that lies between those two accidents is another accident, your life. Now, you can attach all the meaning you want to it, but ultimately it's an accident. And you don't have real purpose and meaning in life if you're an accident. You're simply an accident. Jesus Christ says no. Jesus Christ says you're not an accident. You're a human being created by God for a purpose. So this has nothing to do with getting threatened by hell. This has nothing to do with getting threatened by God's big stick. It has everything to do with thinking logically, thinking clearly.
Without God, there's no ultimate meaning. There's no real purpose. Well, I don't know what you mean by real purpose. That seems kind of cheaty. But as far as ultimate meaning, yes, I agree. No ultimate meaning in the existential sense that you're talking about it, and it doesn't matter one bit. The car that I've got out there parked in the parking lot, I've had for a couple of years. One of these days, it's going to rot away. Does that mean it's not valuable now? Does that mean it doesn't have any value to me now? Does it mean there's no purpose? Should I just go ahead and chuck it now? Let's get rid of it. Eventually, it's going to be useless. That's absurd. We all recognize that things have meaning and purpose right now because they are valuable to us. These are properties that we imbue things with and we imbue people with. Do I matter as much to you as your spouse? Bet you I don't.
I need to know regarding the Quran, the teachings of Buddha, the writings of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Do we have the manuscript evidence today that gives us any degree of certainty that we really have what they wrote? Today, the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we have over 5,000 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript dated from the 2nd through the 10th century AD, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. Before Gutenberg's printing press, we have 25,000 manuscripts, early manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts, 25,000. And the study of those manuscripts show that we have an amazingly accurate Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
The number of manuscripts or copies that we have is a testament to their popularity and how strongly people believed. It is not in any way a testament to how accurate they recorded events.
When they all agree to an infinitesimal degree,
They
it
don't.
is serious evidence that they are accurate.
No, sir, that is simply not true.
Historically accurate.
I can pull every copy.
Yes, it is. Very clearly.
No, sir.
Intellectually
No,
dishonest.
sir, it's not. And if you'd let me finish instead of trying to fucking run over
You
me like
interrupted
that.
me most recently, Matt. So don't.
all right,
pull
just
that
to be
one
sure.
off.
No,
Just to be
sir,
sure
I
we don't
sat
go
here
off the-
quietly while you went
off
on
the
a long
topic.
spiel. I can take every copy of Harry Potter and they will agree to an infinitesimal degree. Does that mean that what they say is true?
No, but it means you
That's
have
my
an accurate
point.
copy of Harry
That's
Potter.
my point. And your argument is the fact that we have many manuscripts that agree to an infinitesimal degree, which is not quite true, but they do
Yes, it
agree
is.
strongly.
Yes, it is. Very
That
true.
your argument that you just made was that this is strong evidence that what they say is true. And that is simply fallacious,
That
as
is, you
demonstrated by your
misunderstood me.
own
I'm sorry, I
response just a moment
miscommunicated.
ago.
Now, what I find astonishing is that Matt says he went to seminary.
No, I didn't.
All right, you were going into the ministry?
I was going to. I didn't go.
Yeah,
I just
you were going to
wanted
go into the
correct.
ministry, okay? Which means you probably read the Bible. And then when you reel off a statement that the Bible doesn't say anything against slavery, that's embarrassing. Let me tell you why it's embarrassing. The main point of the book of Philemon in the New Testament is Paul is writing to a slave owner, Philemon. And he is saying, I met your runaway slave, Onesimus. Now, in the Roman Empire, the law is that you are permitted to execute the guy. He's a runaway slave. But I, Paul, am asking you, Philemon, to take Onesimus back, no longer as a slave, but as a brother in Christ.
Sorry, Cliff's wrong. Philemon is not declaring slavery to be immoral or wrong in any way. It's a letter to an individual about a specific slave and how he wants that slave treated. Exodus 21 advocates slavery, includes how you can screw over your fellow Jew, who you were supposed to let go after 6 years, to serve you forever by giving them a wife and kid and having them come say, hey, I got a wife and kid now. I don't want to leave them. I will be yours forever. Leviticus extends these. Deuteronomy declares that slaves are your property that you can pass on to your descendants. Did Jesus clear this up in Bible 2.0? Did Jesus come up and say, that stuff that you heard that we said back, me and God, that was wrong, and here's the correction? No. Slaves, servants, obey your masters, especially the cruel ones. You know what the only humane thing to say to a slave is? Get out and take everybody with you.
There is nothing vague about Christ's claim to be God in human form, and the writers of the New Testament insisting that's what he claimed and that's what they accepted. When you read the New Testament, there's nowhere near any reasonable room for doubt that he claimed that he was going to rise from the dead, and then he pulled it off, and that's what the eyewitnesses claimed, and that's what the New Testament claims. And when it comes to sexuality and money and power, I think it's rather clear that on the basics, this Bible is very, very clear. I like what Mark Twain said. Mark Twain said, it's not the parts of the Bible I don't understand that disturb me, and obviously there are plenty of parts of the Bible I don't understand. Rather, Mark Twain said, it's the parts of the Bible that I do understand that disturb me. On the basics, the Bible is all too clear.
Yeah. Mark Twain, not a Christian, not a fan of Christianity. But I do appreciate the quote, though. But when you look at the Easter account, there are problems with it that have been attempted to be reconciled by Christians forever. What time did the women get to the tomb? Who were the women who went to the tomb? Why did they go to the tomb? When did they arrive? When they arrived, was the tomb already open or not? Who was at the tomb when they arrived? Was it one angel, one young man, two men, two angels? Where were they seated? Were they inside? Were they outside? Did they roll the tomb away or roll the stone away once they were there? Was it already done beforehand? What did the messengers say? Did the women tell what happened? When did Mary first see Jesus? Could Jesus be touched after the resurrection? All of these things and probably 5 or 6 more, there are inconsistencies and disagreement in the accounts. Some of those can be addressed by somebody else is telling the story and they got a little piece of it wrong or different or decided to tell it in another order. Some of those can't. And for the most important aspect of the most important part of the story of what would be the most important piece of truth and evidence that anybody could have, for this to not be clear, to me, rings of God's silence and God's lack of involvement in protecting the narrative and making it clear to anyone what happened.
Now, my atheist friend, let's go to the hospital. Come on, my atheist friend. Let's go to the room where the baby lies, whose body is being shredded by terminal cancer. Come, my atheist friend. What is your solution? Tough luck, kid. Your mama didn't read her horoscope. It's fate, destiny, chance. That is the despair of atheism. I, as a follower of Christ, will walk the other side of the bed, and along with my atheist friend, I will hold the child's other hand. But in Jesus Christ, I have a suffering God who died on a cross, rose from the dead to give the ultimate solution for suffering, eternal life in heaven.
As your potential atheist friend who is sitting there looking at a child that's suffering and dying, my answer would be more education, more science, and more medicine, and not one single second spent in prayer. That would be my answer. But
if God has this an incredibly important message for humanity and comes down and presents himself in human form and sacrifices himself to himself and wants to preserve this narrative, why didn't God make sure that the Bible includes eyewitness accounts from those individuals?
We do have eyewitness accounts. Matthew was an eyewitness.
The book of Matthew was not written by Matthew, nor was it written by an eyewitness. But I was specifically referring. But I was specifically referring to the 500.
No, baloney. Matthew wrote Matthew.
No, he didn't.
Prove that, but there's evidence supporting that. You just go to Papias. You go to the early church fathers, and they wrote about Matthew writing Matthew, Mark writing Mark, Luke writing Luke, and John writing John. It's very clear.
So here, I have my Bible here. If I go to the book of Matthew on the cover sheet, what's it going to say, the very first line?
Well, why don't you read it for me?
Sure. Although the first gospel is anonymous, the early church fathers were unanimous in holding that Matthew, one of the 12 apostles, was its author. So the early church fathers say that it's Matthew, but the gospel itself, there we go. The gospel itself is anonymous. Among New Testament scholars in Bible colleges, do they hold that Matthew, the apostle, wrote the book of Matthew?
Who is a more reliable source of information about who wrote a book? A person who lived 50 to 100 years after the writing, or a person who lived 2,000 years after the writing?
In this case, the person who lived 2,000 years after the writing, because the individual 50 to 100 years later, or 100 to 200 years later, doesn't have information to the full expanse of Christendom of what we've discovered about the writings in order to compare them. Just like the early historians who were not contemporaries, but were potentially talking to contemporaries, were writing about what they heard. They don't have the investigative ability to do it. They don't have the understanding of analyzing writing. Nothing I'm saying here is remotely controversial among New Testament scholars. But
yes, it is very controversial.
No, it's controversial for people like you, not for New Testament scholars. Let's go ahead and assume that Matthew was an eyewitness. How do we know that Matthew is an accurate reporter of the facts that he supposedly witnessed?
First of all, you explore his document that he wrote carefully, checking such things as Greek manuscripts, checking such things as internal consistency, checking such things as archaeological support of the place names listed in the document.
Of the place names?
You go to other documents.
Archaeological evidence of the place names is corroborating evidence?
Yes.
So is the existence of New York corroborating evidence for Spider-Man?
No, but it is corroborating evidence that I was born in New York City in 1954.
No, it's actually not. The existence of New York is not corroborating evidence that you were born there. Just like the existence of New York is not corroborating evidence that I was born there.
It supports the claim that I make that I was born at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City. The fact that New York City is archaeologically
the existence of a hospital does not corroborate the claim that you were born there.
Statement that I was born in New York City. If there was no New York City, then you'd have good reason to question.
Correct. But you are committing a particular fallacy where you are reversing something. The fact that if there was not a Presbyterian hospital in New York City, then your claim that you were born there would clearly not be the case. But the existence of that hospital does not in any way demonstrate that you were born there. Just like the existence of Mars doesn't demonstrate that I was born on Mars if I were to claim that.
But what is so ironic and so paradoxical is that Matt keeps on referring to, I just decide. Because I've got an intellect, what's right and what's wrong. Well, guess what? The most brilliant nation of the world in the 20th century committed Dachau, Auschwitz, and Buchenwald. It is not enough to have a brilliant mind. The question is, what are you going to do with that mind? Are you going to gas Jews because you think they're a lower level of the evolutionary cycle? Or are you going to stand for justice, for compassion, for the value and dignity of all of human life? And if so, why?
Unfortunately, as much as I'd like to just be nice to Cliff, if you imply that Hitler was an atheist who gassed Jews because they're lower on the evolutionary ladder, you have just committed a despicable act, because Hitler professed to be, in public and private, atheist, a Christian, supported by the Catholic Church. The Nazis ran around with Gott mit uns on their belt buckles, which is God with us, and evolution was banned in Germany. The teaching of evolution was banned. You don't get to lay this at the feet of science, and you don't get to claim that a monster, just because he doesn't happen to believe in God the same way you did, was anything at all like an atheist or a secular humanist or anything along those lines. It's just flatly false.